the Geneva Watchmaking Institute fell silent. It was September 2019, and the International Horological Symposium had drawn master watchmakers, precision engineers, chronometry experts, and luxury timepiece executives from across Switzerland, Germany, Japan, and other nations renowned for their clockmaking heritage, all gathered inside one of Europe's most prestigious technical institutions. At the center of the expert panel sat Master Klaus Hoffmann. His very presence commanded immediate reverence from everyone in the ornate lecture hall. At 56 years old, Klaus Hoffmann was considered one of the finest craftsmen in the modern horological world. He had apprenticed under fourth-generation Geneva masters for 12 years, in the traditional Swiss manner. With his own hands, he had created over 300 luxury timepieces, each one selling to collectors worldwide for prices exceeding €200,000. He had won the prestigious Prix d'Honneur Award for chronometric precision 4 times in his distinguished career. He served as chief technical consultant for 3 of Switzerland's most exclusive watchmaking houses, names synonymous with luxury, legacy, and perfection. And over 30 years, he had personally trained 63 apprentices who now worked in the most prestigious ateliers across Europe and Asia. His technical expertise was unmatched among his peers. His steady hands could manipulate components measuring mere fractions of a millimeter with absolute certainty. His knowledge of traditional Swiss methods was encyclopedic and revered. Beside him sat his longtime colleague, the respected master horologist Heinrich Weber, who had collaborated with Klaus for 20 years and shared his uncompromising standards for Swiss precision. Other panelists included a German chronometry specialist whose work on escapement mechanisms was studied in technical schools worldwide, and a Japanese master watchmaker whose fusion of Swiss and Japanese techniques had won international acclaim. The symposium was progressing as expected. Measured discussions on caliber innovation, supply chain challenges in luxury manufacturing, and the growing demand for artisanal timepieces in Asian markets. Then a moderator posed a question about global expansion of skilled watchmaking labor. Could precision watchmaking be successfully trained and scaled outside of Switzerland, Germany, and Japan? Klaus Hoffmann leaned forward. In a tone that carried decades of authority, he stated plainly, and without hesitation, that in his experience consulting for luxury houses that had attempted to establish production partnerships in Southeast Asia, Filipino workers specifically lacked the innate precision and disciplined temperament required for fine watchmaking. He spoke of cultural differences in attention to detail. He spoke of an inability to maintain the psychological patience that micro-precision work demanded. He called it, in his words, a matter of aptitude shaped by tradition. The room did not erupt. It did not push back. It absorbed his words with the quiet deference that a man of his stature had come to expect over 5 decades in the industry. No one challenged him. For a long moment, no one said anything at all. Then, from near the back of the lecture hall, a hand rose. A man stood. He was in his early 40s, neatly dressed, calm in his posture, carrying no visible credential badge of the sort that elite symposium attendees typically wore to announce their status. He introduced himself as Eduardo Santos, a Filipino precision engineer and horological technician who had worked for 11 years in the watchmaking industry, first in Manila, then in collaboration with European partners. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse. He simply asked Master Hoffmann whether he would be willing to look at something. From a leather case, Eduardo removed a timepiece. He placed it on the panel table and invited the assembled experts to examine it. What happened next would be discussed in horological circles for years to come. The watch that Eduardo Santos placed before the panel was a hand-assembled tourbillon, one of the most technically demanding complications in all of watchmaking. A tourbillon is a rotating cage that holds the escapement and balance wheel of a watch, designed to counteract the effects of gravity on timekeeping accuracy. It is, by any measure, the summit of the watchmaker's art. As the panelists leaned in and examined the piece under magnification, the murmuring began. The movement contained 214 individual components. Every bridge, every jewel setting, every gear tooth, every spring assembled by hand. The finishing on the plates was Geneva stripping, Cots de Genève, executed to a standard that caused Heinrich Weber, Klaus Hoffmann's colleague of 20 years, to set down the loop and look up at Eduardo Santos in silence. The tolerances were not merely acceptable, they were extraordinary. Klaus Hoffmann himself examined the piece for nearly 4 minutes without speaking. When he finally set it down, the room was absolutely still. Eduardo then calmly explained that this timepiece had been assembled entirely in the Philippines by a team of 12 Filipino technicians, none of whom had ever trained in Switzerland. They had learned through a combination of independent study, mentorship within their own community, and access to technical documentation. The movement had been submitted, anonymously, to 3 independent chronometric testing bodies in Europe. All 3 had certified it to COSC standards. One had noted it among the finest hand-finished movements they had evaluated that year. The silence that followed Eduardo Santos's explanation was of a different quality than the silence that had followed Klaus Hoffmann's remarks. Hoffmann's silence had been the silence of unchallenged authority. This silence was the silence of recalibration. Several attendees would later describe the moment as one of the most uncomfortable and ultimately clarifying they had ever witnessed at a professional gathering, not because anyone was humiliated in a theatrical way, but because the evidence on that table demanded something that credentials and tradition could not deflect: honesty. Master Hoffmann did not deny what he saw. To his credit, and this would become an important part of how the story was later remembered, he did not retreat into defensiveness. He examined the movement again. He asked Eduardo 2 technical questions about the finishing process. He listened to the answers. Then he said quietly that he had been wrong. The story spread quickly through the tightly connected world of fine watchmaking. Eduardo Santos was subsequently invited to present at 2 additional European horological conferences. His team in the Philippines was contacted by a Swiss luxury group exploring authentic artisanal production partnerships, not as low-cost labor, but as master craftsmen. Klaus Hoffmann, for his part, issued a formal written statement through the symposium's organizing body, acknowledging that his comments had been based on assumption rather than evidence, and that the work he had examined demonstrated a standard of craftsmanship that required no qualification by geography. The statement was characteristically precise. It was also, by most accounts, genuine. The horological world, like many worlds built on tradition, lineage, and the slow transmission of craft knowledge across generations, has always had an intricate relationship with the question of belonging. Who inherits the right to excellence? Is mastery something passed down through geography, through heritage, through centuries of accumulated reputation? Or is it something that lives in the hands and the mind of anyone willing to pursue it with enough dedication? Eduardo Santos had not arrived at that symposium to make a statement about national identity or geopolitical equity. He had arrived because he loved watchmaking, because he and his team had spent years in quiet, unrecognized devotion to a craft that the world had not yet imagined them capable of. The tourbillon on that table was not a protest, it was a question answered. In the world of fine watchmaking, time is everything. A single second's deviation over 24 hours is the difference between mediocrity and mastery. The industry has built its entire identity on the relentless pursuit of that difference. What Eduardo Santos understood, and what the movement on that table made undeniable, is that the pursuit of precision does not begin in Switzerland. It begins in the decision to pursue it. Wherever you are. Whoever you are, the clock does not care about your passport.